Since the 1950s, organized networks across the United Kingdom have targeted an estimated 250,000 young girls for trafficking and systematic abuse. These networks concentrated their activity in post-industrial northern towns, places like Rotherham, Rochdale, and Telford. In Rotherham, conservative estimates suggest at least 1,400 children were sexually exploited between 1997 and 2013. Perpetrators integrated their operations into the local taxi industry and takeaways, using these everyday services to groom and transport victims across municipal borders. The primary targets were young, working-class girls. Those residing within the state care system were particularly vulnerable, facing an exploitation risk profile 6 times higher than their peers. These predators were highly organized, but they did not rely on invisibility. They operated in the middle of communities that were left completely unprotected by the state. Local police and social services received hundreds of red flags and formal warnings from healthcare workers. Despite this constant stream of evidence, the official response remained static. Instead of investigating the grooming gangs, police forces in Rochdale and Rotherham often dismissed the victims. They framed the systemic rape of marginalized girls as lifestyle choices, a label that effectively shifted the criminal blame onto the children. This raises a difficult question. How do coordinated criminal networks operate with total impunity for decades while generating a massive paper trail of police reports? To find the answer, we have to look at the administrative culture of the agencies involved and a bureaucracy blinded by its own internal priorities. Perpetrators exerted psychological control by layering religious justifications over their crimes. Testimonies show that abusers used a specific dichotomy to justify their actions, referring to white victims as kuffar, or non-believers. This rhetoric was used to characterize the girls as having lower moral value, creating a shared sense of permission within the gangs. However, Asian and Muslim girls were also targeted by these same networks. Their abuse remained hidden from the state because the perpetrators understood how to use local cultural dynamics to ensure silence. In many South Asian communities, social standing is tied to izzat, or family honor. Abusers blackmailed victims with the threat of sharam, shame, knowing that a disclosure of abuse could lead to the total ostracization of the victim's entire family. This created a sociological trap where victims were silenced by the fear of shaming their families on one side and the indifference of the state on the other. Frontline professionals like Sarah Robotham and Detective Constable Maggie Oliver attempted to break the silence, compiling detailed reports and names of the primary suspects in the Rochdale networks. Their evidence was sent to local councils that were later described by independent inquiries as dysfunctional. In Rotherham, the workplace culture was officially characterized as macho, sexist, and hostile to transparency. Senior managers focused on protecting the reputation of the council. They suppressed internal intelligence and marginalized the whistleblowers who were trying to initiate a response. The system deployed its administrative power to neutralize the individuals who were providing the evidence needed to stop the abuse. This administrative silence was driven by a specific fear. Officials were afraid that if they targeted predominantly Pakistani heritage men, they would be labeled as racist or culturally insensitive. Former Rotherham MP Dennis McShane later admitted that he and others failed to investigate the scale of the abuse occurring in their own constituencies. McShane described a political culture that prioritized not rocking the multicultural boat over the safety of vulnerable children. This prioritization of community cohesion over empirical reality prevented law enforcement from acting, allowing the networks to expand for decades. The impact of this failure reaches into the physical biology of the children involved. Repeated extreme trauma physically alters the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the system that regulates the body's stress response. Continuous exposure to stress hormones causes measurable structural changes. The amygdala, which detects threats, becomes overactive, while the hippocampus, responsible for memory and learning, can actually shrink due to cortisol toxicity. This trauma is also captured through epigenetic modifications. Markers attached to the victim's DNA, physically encoding a state of hyperarousal and increasing the lifetime risk of chronic illness. Because the state failed to intervene, these biological and psychological scars are passed to the next generation, embedding a legacy of trauma into these communities. When the scale of the failure became undeniable, it triggered a total collapse of the local authorities. Top executives were forced out, and police leaders were eventually forced to issue public apologies for what they called borderline incompetence. The legislative response, through the Crime and Policing Bill 2025 and 2026, focuses on dismantling the mechanisms of silence. It introduces a mandatory duty to report abuse and removes the time limits on when survivors can seek legal redress against the state. The new framework also mandates the collection of ethnicity data. This is a direct attempt to stop the obfuscation that previously paralyzed police forces, ensuring that future safeguarding decisions are based on evidence rather than cultural sensitivities. Protecting the vulnerable requires constant empirical vigilance. A society fails its children when its institutions become more afraid of the social consequences of the truth than they are of the truth itself.